Hi, my name is Barry Phipps. I'm an Iowa City-based artist, mostly a photographer. I believe this is my 6th annual solo exhibition at Hudson River Gallery. Nick and I have been doing one every September for many years, long enough that I've lost count. Since my last show here last September, a few things have changed. Most notably, at 53 years old, I became a grad student at the University of Iowa School of Art. So I'm getting an MFA in photography. And the other change is I've switched from photographing with small and medium format cameras, little cameras that I can hold in my hand like this, to a very heavy, cumbersome, and methodical large format camera. So I'm including the camera in the show to show everyone that basically, as opposed to photographing on a negative that's about this big, it prints on a negative that's 8 by 10 inches. And we have some of the negatives on the light table in the show to show you. So the look of them is entirely different. Most notably, they're more detailed. They have a phenomenal amount of detail. So I'm printing large scale so that we can reveal the detail in a lot of these prints. The other change in it is that going from handheld, I'm now using a very heavy, cumbersome camera that requires a heavy tripod. And the setup time, basically it takes a really long time to set these things up. So it changes what you photograph. The cost is also astronomical for each shot versus pennies per shot on small format. By the time film and processing is done, it's about $35 per photograph. So because of that, combined with the long setup times, I'm only photographing things that I'm really taking my time to set up and that are important to me. And so for the first round of photos that I took on this was just like photographing friends, family homes, my parents' house, things like that. Just things that I would like to have a document of, 30 years from now in the best resolution possible. Yeah, so a few of the prints in the show I printed with my printer, Richard Solon at Wilderness Studio. And so I'm combining some of those prints with prints I made myself. As a student, I'm required to do a lot of crits throughout the year and print my photos myself. I talked to my professor about going to Wilderness to have them printed, and she said, no, you can't do that, that's cheating. So a lot of these prints I struggled with to print myself to get them to the same level of quality of Richard's prints that I'm showing them alongside. And I don't think I quite reached that level. It's just not possible. But I try to do the best job I can. So we're kind of presenting these as work prints. These are prints that I tried to make them to the best of my ability, and they were already originally presented in exhibitions I had as a student. So, there's pinholes in the corner off the images where I've pinned them to the wall. And these are the only prints that exist. So we're selling them accordingly. So I do think when I go back to work with Richard again, we'll probably take them to another level, and then I'll edition the prints out. But, for now, I think that they look nice enough to sell, and if people are under the understanding that these are work prints and not like final edition prints, we're selling them at a lot more of a reasonable price than what my work has gone for in the past here. And sort of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to pay these lower prices because I probably won't be offering this again. As next year I intend to show an entirely different body of work that's not photographs at all. So one body of work that I'm presenting here that was for my school work that I presented as for a crit last semester is large format photos of more sculptural works. And this is from a project I called a collaboration with my former self, as a lot of these sculptural elements are me picking up where I left off 30 years ago. So I graduated from the Kansas City Art Institute in 1990, and starting school once again and doing a lot of sculptural works, I decided to originally begin with 2 sculptures that were in my 1990 show and use those as starting points to continue to compose with those, add different elements and stuff. And so these photos are kind of like me bringing my new sensibilities as a photographer to these old objects I made like 30 years ago. And also using sort of this aesthetic of found objects and you know, these sort of like crazy sort of semi-technological devices, making new ones inspired by the old ones. And so a lot of the biggest prints in the show are just from this collaboration with my former self project of, you know, kind of combining this 30-year-ago aesthetic with like newer work. Some of the photos in this show are from a book called The Exuberance Phase, which I published last year. It was published by a zine-based publisher in the UK called Static Age Zines. And for this book, I wanted to combine my recently acquired bookbinding skills that I learned in school with a printed published magazine. So I worked with True Art Graphics in town to have the pages printed, and using these raw pages, I trimmed them down, folded them, and using a sewn binding, basically did a bookbinding job on this to take the printed pages and bind the books myself. So I used a Sunboards binding technique that was pioneered by Gary Frost at the University of Iowa, using his technique. So we have a few of those books here for sale. It's some of the last ones left from that edition. But basically during the pandemic, I spent a couple of months in my basement binding these books, which took so long to do that I could never charge for the work that I put into them. Yeah, so some of the other large format works that I'm presenting alongside my other projects are from my new project of Moffett houses in Iowa City. And Howard Moffett was a builder who built a lot of homes in Iowa City during a boom era here where the university grew. And during this time of expansion, there was a high demand for affordable rental properties. And Howard Moffett designed a lot of homes with a lot of character. He wanted to make affordable rental homes available where each one was unique. And so this project is kind of in its infancy right now. I plan to develop it as a book project, but also I'll have a show here at Hudson River in a couple of years of the best works from those. But I have just a handful of images from this series so far, from the initial push I made earlier last year to get these going. So I have 5 or 6 images from that. And also I have some of the 8x10 Ektachrome negatives on display here on the light table. So you can see the image, which is a positive image, is not a negative. So you can see how these images look on an 8x10 negative, which is, I think, pretty impressive. This large format series that I started didn't begin at the first week of school. It was something that I'd been developing earlier, but I wanted it to be kind of my prime area of focus, you know, in grad school. So I combined some that I'd taken earlier with things, but I would say in school, mostly the more sculptural pieces are things that I did as school projects, right? Some of the Moffett ones were taken before I started school and some were during, but once school began, it became very difficult to schedule people to photograph their homes in the middle of, you know, working 60 hours a week, teaching as part of my grad school studies, and also taking boatloads of classes. So the Moffett project is a very back burner thing right now, and when I graduate with my degree, it will be something I'll dive into a lot more, because it's kind of hard to do that while going to school.